you remember the old school, calculator watches, you could buy those things for, $10. And then you contrast that with something like a Rolex that all it does is tell time. Where's the value? The value is in whatever the consumer is ultimately choosing. So again, that's the world that the salesperson is in.
Hello and welcome to the Being an Engineer podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Clint Biggs, Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Testeract. With over 3 decades of experience in sales leadership and a proven track record in driving growth and innovation, Clint has been instrumental in shaping strategies that bridge the gap between engineering solutions and market needs. Clint, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. It is great to be here with you, and I appreciate the discussion.
All right. Maybe you can tell us just a little bit about your background and some of the companies that you've worked for.
Yeah, absolutely. So by way of introduction, I have spent really the entirety of my career in the test engineering space. I initially, coming out of school, really wanted to focus on electronic design, computer development, things of that nature, and really kind of found myself by circumstance in a role with National Instruments way back in 1992. Spent almost 24 years of my career at NI in a variety of roles, a lot of that in around sales development, applications engineering, a variety of roles in that regard. And really kind of fell in love with the idea of test engineering and ultimately what that means. Following my time at National Instruments, I went out on my own and, rather than focusing on individual product resale or product sales as NI was doing, I focused more on solution development. My company was SOLUbit, headquartered out of Colorado Springs, and enjoyed that for another 8 or 9 years before merging our operations in with Testeract. And I've enjoyed that for the last 2 years.
Oh, interesting. I didn't realize that. So you were acquired by Testeract, it sounds like.
That's correct.
Okay. Very cool. When you say test engineering, what kind of testing are you referring to typically? We do a lot of testing, and it's almost always mechanical testing,
Mm-hmm.
How much force does it require to move this lever? That sort of thing. What kind of tests are you most familiar and comfortable with?
I love that question. The kinds of tests that we do are really all of the above. And it's electrical tests, it's electromechanical tests, it's simulation in some cases. It's really the whole gambit. It's a beautiful, and this is part of why I've enjoyed my career. I think in test engineering, we're not focused on any one industry per se. So, semiconductor, for instance, or transportation, or aerospace, we really service all of them. When you look at the focus of test engineering specifically, the question is, does your company or do you individually make something? And if you make something, particularly something that's going out into the consumer world, you need to test and validate that it's doing exactly what you think and expect. And so, really the experience and the opportunity, the market that goes around test engineering, spans the breadth of anyone or any company that makes really anything.
So is this anything from an inexpensive consumer product, maybe a cell phone case or something like that, through medical devices, through a sophisticated defense system, like all of the above?
Yep, that's absolutely right. So take the first example there, an inexpensive cell phone cover, whatever the case may be. What are the things that you may be interested in looking at that? Well, one may be the tensile strength of the material, at what force or at what angle do these things bend or break? Looking for durability, right? You want to be able to say, for instance, you've got the most durable product on the market. You test and figure that out. It may also be things like, maybe the way the material ultimately looks and wears. Is it able to maintain its color and its pattern? other aspects of that. So sometimes it's literal physical tests, and these are the things that, for instance, you guys work quite a bit in, as you're looking at that. But sometimes it may be non-contact, vision-based measurement systems. And again, everything in between. It's fascinating.
And you do this all internally?
Correct. So with Testeract specifically, and one of the reasons why I was so excited to merge in here and work with the team that we have, we're not just a group of really good test engineers that build test systems. We are that, but for us, we've built enough test systems out there that we've learned the lessons that we need to learn in order to shorten that process up. And a big part of that is the creation of a standardized test framework in the software side that that really gives you a 30 to 50% start on any given test that you may ultimately wind up doing. The device that you may be testing, or the thing that you're ultimately interested in, that's always going to be unique to a given manufacturer or a given customer. But the approach to testing that is relatively the same. You've got a design, you've got some requirements, you've got some specifications that you ultimately need to approach. You're going to have some hardware pieces. How do you interface to it? How do you communicate to it? Then you're going to have some common software pieces. How do I want to visualize that? How do I want the operator to interact with it? And as much of the commonality as you can take and deal with in a standardized or modular way up front, the faster you're going to be ultimately at developing that test. And that's really the exciting part for me.
Now, does Testeract focus mostly on building custom systems that you then deploy at a customer's site, or receiving customer product, whether it's software or hard goods products, performing the testing, and then providing a report?
It's more the former. So for us, the most common engagement would be a design engineer, a production engineer, R&D, just more broadly. And they've got an idea. And, what are the steps to take that idea ultimately to market? You're going to go through some level of simulation and some level of characterization. And then you're going to validate, maybe a proof of concept that ultimately goes with that. And at some point, you start building up potential articles, release candidates. First articles we'll tend to call that. At the point you're comfortable with that, you move really more into production, where you're moving, testing masses of these things. And the tests themselves, the information you're looking for ultimately may be the same, but what you're doing with that is different. And so, in our case, we want to collaborate and consult with these engineers to get them through that process as fast as they can.
How about things like inspection or metrology, measuring? Does that fall in or out of scope of what Testeract does?
Help me understand that a little bit more. So metrology, calibration.
Like CMM inspection, you're putting a part on a coordinate measuring machine and pulling discrete dimensions off of it to see if a part is within tolerance or out of tolerance. It's kind of test adjacent, I guess. I think that's probably not the kind of work that Testeract does. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think your language is appropriate. It's test adjacent. We would work with and support something like that. But the most common use case is someone needs to, in this case, an engineer, design, or technician operator, wants to move beyond the individual manual range of pushing a button on a digital multimeter, or turning a knob on a scope or something, taking a reading and then manually doing something with that. And instead, if we could say, okay, what are all the measurements, all the steps that you need to do? What does that script ultimately look like, that test procedure? Let's automate that and run through that as accurately and as fast as possible, and make sure that we're capturing the data, providing the reporting and an insight with that data that they ultimately need.
Terrific. Okay. Yeah. You've worked between sales and engineers for a long time. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen when sales and engineering teams try to collaborate?
Oh, that is such a great question.
Let's open up a can of worms here, huh?
It is. So, my own experience has been built around the concept that really good engineers can go out and be really good account managers and good sales managers. and the reason for that is ultimately there's this desire to get in and understand what their customers are doing and why they're doing it that way so that you can offer them the best solution. And so kind of putting my sales hat on here, I am a huge proponent of a just fundamentally a needs-based selling approach. The traditional image of what a sales professional looks like probably for most people smells like a car salesman or a real estate agent or something like that, where they're pushing something on you that really you probably don't want. They took a notional idea that, you made the mistake of walking onto that parking lot and, you're going to get what's it going to take to put you into this 78 Cutlass Supreme, today. And that is the most horrible sales experience you can have. And you contrast that with, more of a technical sales or kind of these engineering sales that we have here. And it is more consultative. And your goal ultimately is to go, into these places and understand what they're trying to achieve before you ever get to the recommendation side of things. And, it's an art, it's a science, and it's altogether fulfilling.
How does the business behind that work? Because it takes a lot of time to really understand at a deep level what a customer is going through, right? Yep. So, not even necessarily specific to Testeract, but just generally based on your experience in the industry, are these consultative approaches typically like paid engagements just to understand what's going on? Or is this just a cost of doing business where two engineers go out, meet with the customer and spend however long it takes to really understand the problem and develop candidate solutions?
Yeah, it's a good combination of both. Which going back to your previous question is why I think engineers that choose more of a business approach to their careers and that want to enter into the sales world, I think do so well because you can cover a lot of ground technically with what the customer's trying to do just on a given sales call if you understand fundamentals of electrical measurements, of mechanical, tests. And quite frankly, my own experience is it kind of doesn't matter if you're an electrical engineer or mechanical engineer or a computer engineer or an aerospace engineer, biomed, it doesn't really matter. The core is that you've got the capacity of seeing and learning and understanding problem solving, and you've got this technical basis that you can ultimately build on. Now, that said, there is only so far you can take a given sales engagement, and at some point, you really do need to enter into that space where you're doing probably more of a proper design engagement. And that's where you roll up your sleeves and either take a statement of work or a raw set of requirements and really dig into what the solution is going to be. Either standing that up by yourself or maybe, working collaboratively with your customer in either case. But it really is a bit of a bridge there. My own humble opinion is the further you can take it in that sales engagement, that sales qualification effort, the better you are, and certainly the more smoothly it works later.
Have you ever wasted weeks fixing a design issue that could have been caught early, or struggled to find real, practical answers to manufacturing or tolerance stack-up problems? PDX 2025 is not your typical trade show. It's a hands-on engineering training event built for problem solving. Learn advanced CAD surface modeling, GD&T, DFM, adhesives and bonding techniques, metrology, and much, much more directly from subject matter experts in the industry. Bring your toughest engineering challenges, get live expert advice, and see real-world solutions in action. PDX 2025 is happening October 21st and 22nd in Phoenix, Arizona. Walk away with new skills that make you more valuable, help you grow your career faster, and even increase your earning potential. Spots are limited. Sign up now at The Wave. Looking back on all of your experience, can you identify any trends or patterns where there are misunderstandings between sales teams and engineering teams? What are some of the common misunderstandings that occur there?
Well, I'm going to probably grind a little bit of my own personal axes as I go through here.
Please.
I'll give you a bit of a macro trend that I've it's in not just this industry, it's in the world at large anymore. But it certainly comes into play when you start looking at the interchange between engineers and sales in our industry, for instance. And the issue, quite frankly, is over dependence upon operational efficiency, operational process. We happen to live in a world where we don't want really for anything. We have information at our fingertips. People go and find and get what they want. And that is a beautiful, beautiful thing that's out there. But many times companies will take that idea and say, okay, I'm going to force my customer base, potential customer base, the public at large, to approach me a certain way, to have to jump through these hoops to get certain information, or to, heaven forbid, if pick up a phone call and you get the automated self-serve thing, or you go to their website and you have to navigate 20 different things just to get a simple question answered or something. And we created an overdependence of that. And again, that's a personal pet peeve of mine. It flies in the face ultimately of where I feel you need to be, one as a salesperson, but particularly as a sales engineer, and that is building relationships, building rapport, and meeting the customers where they want to be met. Some of them want to at an arm's length. That is 100% okay. You want to service that. But if that is your only approach, boy, you're really going to mess that up. And secondarily, just if I can kind of stretch that a little bit, internally, sometimes there's a little bit too much reliance on process as well, which forces people to swim in lanes, right? In my experience, the best engagements that you're going to wind up having, the most successful projects that you're going to wind up putting out there, are where the right people are collaborating the right way. And quite honestly, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Like, you got to engage. And so, anyway, big question for me, for sure.
I have to agree with you there. I remember many years ago, we had a pretty rigid process for how we created and assigned tasks to engineers. Mm. And at some point, we did an audit on this process. And what we learned was that, for the most part, people were not following that process. And things were going well. Like, the work was getting done efficiently, but we weren't using that process. And what we learned was most of the communication, it was just happening with conversations, people at the office sitting next to each other talking about what needed to be done. And that's how the information was getting passed back and forth, as opposed to like filling out this detailed task in a task management application and assigning it to a specific person, and all the communication going through this purpose-built application. It really came down to just conversations between people, and that seemed to work really well. So we didn't altogether abandon that process, but we definitely loosened it and relaxed it and said, okay, just make sure that the work gets done, and here's a tool that you can use, but if it works better for you just to have a conversation, great, just do that. And that seemed to work well. We do everything with and through people. So your point about building relationships is very important, for sure, in a sales role. But you know what? We're all selling something at some point. So It's important for all of us, especially us engineers who don't like to go out in daylight and interact with human beings, to understand how to develop relationships with other people. Yeah. What are some pro tips that you can share for how to develop relationships with new people?
That's also a really good question. I would say step one, kind of built into the question that you have to put yourself out there in some regard. A lot of people, I don't want to say hide, but a lot of people kind of hide behind the keyboard, live in this, kind of digital world where here you and I are, miles and states apart from one another, having a very good dialogue here. And it's fantastic, but it's not the same as if you and I were sitting across, the table from each other at a little cafe and just having a discussion there. There is no substitute fundamentally for human interactions, like real human interaction. So, my single best advice, I guess, for engineers that may be a little bit more introverted is just understand that there's nothing wrong with being introverted. There's nothing wrong with wanting to get in and focus on a job and move forward. But I always like to say we are naturally analog creatures, and trying to fit ourselves squarely in a digital world, it doesn't work. You have to put yourself out there a little bit. So there's all sorts of clubs and things that are there. There's all sorts of skill areas. I'll give you kind of an old school, one that I saw thrive at National Instruments back in the day. And that was, the old Toastmasters Club, learning the basic skills for standing up and speaking in front of a crowd. That was never something that I wanted to do, never something I had interest in. But at the point that my career started going a certain way, I realized the value in it, and it turned out, hey, it was pretty darn fun. The other side of that, quite honestly, is you're going to wind up meeting a lot of people in your career. And if you, this is good advice just in general, not just for engineers, but if you can remember to just maintain a relationship with them after the project, maybe you're connected on LinkedIn or whatever. Send them notes from time to time. Actually look at the prompts it'll give you, their birthdays or whatever. Those small touches actually make a difference. And heaven forbid, if you ever find yourself on the outside of a job looking in, one of the other differences that's in our world today, nobody cares about resumes. You're not winning anything by papering resumes. Everything is done through referral. And by maintaining your networks and actually having some semblance of a genuine relationship, you'll serve yourself well there too.
Well said. Well said. Let me take a short break here and share with everyone that the Being an Engineer podcast is brought to you by Pipeline Design and Engineering, where we don't design pipelines, but we do help companies develop advanced manufacturing processes, automated machines, and custom fixtures complemented with product design and R&D services. Learn more at teampipeline.us. The podcast is also sponsored by The Wave, an online platform of free tools, education, and community for engineers. Learn more at thewave.engineer. And we have the privilege of speaking with Clint Biggs today. Clint, can you think of a time when sales and engineering really came together well to solve a problem for a customer? Is there a story that comes to mind that you can share, something like that?
In our world, that is literally business as usual. So, let me start by answering that question by saying, again, to me, the worst, technical sales process there is when the salesperson only cares about uncovering a lead, receiving the PO, and then throwing a project over the wall to another team. There's language and rules that are out there that go with that, but the idea of actually having account management, really is the goal of sales as opposed to just pure POs and revenues is a big difference maker. And so at Testeract, for instance, our teams stay engaged completely, on projects. We're just working with, a group, I'll probably leave them unnamed at the point, but they're, a major government, prime contractor. And we're looking at thrust vector control systems, rocket gimbal assemblies, for lack of a better word. And again, these are complex engagements, complex problems. And on the one hand, it's quote unquote easy for the salesperson, the sales engineer in this case, to go and talk with them, get the initial requirements, talk them into an idea of a solution, get the PO, throw it over the team. But no, we've stayed completely engaged. And when problems invariably surface, it's that account manager there helping to make sure they understand and have the customer's interest at heart, and understanding where the project management team is coming together and creating some key solutions. And literally we just went through, an example of that just this past week. And, you put yourself out there a little more because it's the right thing to do with the customer. And everybody wins. It truly is a win-win. You make someone successful, it comes around.
In your opinion, what do you think is the relationship between sales and marketing?
That is two sides of the same coin for sure. Are all salespeople good marketers? Absolutely not. And I'm probably in that definition. I'd like to think that I've got cool ideas, marketing ideas, but I don't. And are all good marketers good salespeople? No. But fundamentally, you're moving towards a common goal, and that is, generating awareness of who and what you're doing, either whether it's a product or a service or whatever the case may be. And then ultimately crafting messages, that resonate with people so they understand why they should care about that for themselves individually. And really at that point, marketing is generally the tip of the spear in that regard, and going out and capturing that awareness or those leads, for lack of a better word, the general expression of interest in whatever it is that you're doing. And it's typically the salesperson's responsibility to then convert that interest into, business, whatever that is. But the reality is that is a hand-in-hand role. Sales informs the marketing side on what they're seeing and what they're doing, and marketing informs sales on kind of the larger macros. And by the way, in the interest of engineering, some of the absolute best marketers I've seen also have engineering backgrounds, and it's because they see and approach things from a logical perspective, and they're looking at what does this product or service actually solve, and let me think of all these derivatives and how it's going to play out there, and how do I put that in language that somebody would appreciate. And so it's a very viable career for someone that perhaps has gone to school to be an engineer to then pursue a technical marketing role, a comms role, marketing communications, just as well as it might be for a field sales engineer or something like that.
Yeah. This next question is not specific to you in any way, and hopefully you're comfortable answering it, but if you're not, that's fine as well. For engineers who are listening to this thinking, sales engineer, maybe I'd like to try that out. What is the money like for a sales engineer? Like, how does a salary and bonus work for a sales engineer? What's the earning potential versus like a straight up salaried engineer?
Yeah, fantastic question, and I'm 100% comfortable talking about that. In general, sales folks have a higher earning potential. And the reason why is because there's inherent risk that also comes with that. So, traditional sales jobs many times will be 100% commission. My experience is in the technical sales world, and particularly in the test engineering world, the automation world, such that you're in, that's not a good combination. And engineers tend to be much less risk tolerant in that kind of regard. So typically, and I've seen this play out across the full 30 plus years of my career, typically what you're going to wind up seeing is some sort of combined on-target earnings model, which means the engineer is going to receive some portion of their salary, usually about 60%. It'll range between 50 and 70%, but a 60-40 model is probably the most typical. 60% of that target salary is guaranteed base. And they're just like, this is for you going out and doing your job, and this is to make sure that you're doing all the other stuff that goes ultimately with that. And then you'll have like 40% or so of your target salary at risk. And that's contingent upon how well you're able to achieve your quota, your goals, the revenue goals that the company needs you to bring in. And it's a direct prorated portion. If you hit 50% of your quota, a lot of times you'll make 50% of that. It's not always that way. Sometimes it's more of a curve that goes on with that. But almost all plans also allow for and gladly pay accelerated rates once you exceed your goals. So usually your earning is ultimately unlimited, but from a salary range, depends upon which industry, which roles you ultimately get in. But, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, those are not unheard of numbers as a sales engineer.
Wow, that's great. Thank you for walking through that.
You bet.
Let's talk about incentives, because I think sales engineers have incentives that are often different than the actual engineer doing the work, right? Sales engineer, they want to make the sale because that's where, like you said, maybe 40 or some percentage of their income is coming from. And then the engineer, the engineer's incentive is just do a good job, right? Complete projects on time, on budget, work efficiently, manage your time. What are some good solutions to align the incentives of the sales team and the engineering team? And do you see problems arise based on different incentives very often, or for the most part, that's just not an issue?
No, that's absolutely an issue. And let me kind of take a step back. The successful sales engineer, in a perfect world, is always meeting or exceeding their quota, their sales goal. But if you're meeting that goal 100% of the time, you could argue maybe the goal isn't high enough, and organizations aren't dumb. They're going to put numbers out there that the organization needs, but they also want to stretch you, right? And so those things kind of go in play, and so you're always kind of navigating that. The reality is, salespeople are not just responsible for revenue. They all are also responsible for feedback. They are many times the voice of the customer back into the organization. And so there's other ways that they are adding value back in, and there's other metrics and KPIs or whatever that need to be captured and pulled back in as well. So, you can look at a given sales job and say, hey, let's boil this down to, a set of activities or metrics. And this kind of gets into that over processing that I was talking about earlier. But, they could say you need to do a certain number of customer calls a week, or you need to do a certain number of demos or visits. And those are fine, proxies, for what you have out there. But really the ultimate goal is to say, okay, what's it going to take to achieve your revenue goals, within, reason? And what's it going to take to capture this feedback in a way that allows us to accelerate our own development internally? You're hearing the features that the customer needs. You're hearing these other things. So that's a really long background to ultimately get to your question of how do you then incentivize that? And the simple answer for people is, well, sales guys, they only respond to money. It's true. They do respond to money many times. That's one of the driving forces of people perhaps choosing that. But it's not always that way. There is recognition. There is engagement that goes that sometimes has nothing to do with money. And for engineers, I find that seeing that successful completion go around and getting to, for lack of a better word, a customer satisfaction score or a net promoter score from that customer that says, yes, you guys really took care of us and we're going to recommend you, and getting that referral. That there's a lot of interesting, metricing and valuing that goes around those types of thought lines.
Very thoughtful answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to an engineer who wants to improve his or her ability to communicate effectively with the sales team?
Yeah. The best thing that I would say is, don't just speak in facts. Engineers look at facts in detail, and again, it's a pretty black or white world many times. And just understand that, again, the sales person in this regard usually has a foot in that world, but then a foot in this other analog world of the customer it's not about a fact. It's about what that person cares about. So let me kind of define that a little bit. It would be easy to assume, for instance, that the more features your product or service has, the more valuable it is. And that couldn't be further from the truth. You remember the old school, calculator watches, you could buy those things for, $10. And they did all sorts of little cool things or whatever. And then you contrast that with something like a Rolex that all it does is tell time. Where's the value? The value is in whatever the consumer is ultimately choosing. And in one case there, it's about the materials, it's about the prestige, it's about the whatever. And the important thing is to understand that. So again, that's the world that the salesperson is in. What does that end customer or the people that we're interfacing with, what do they care about? And it's taking some of these, truths or bits of information that the engineer has and putting it in a way that those people care about. So, if an engineer wants to learn to work better with sales or to communicate better with sales, speak more than in, closed sentences. like open-ended questions are good. Open-ended answers are good. Like have a bit of a dialogue and ultimately try to understand what's really important.
Terrific. So you've worked with a lot of different industries over the years. Does your approach change much based on industry, or is it always kind of the same process that you go through?
Yeah, each industry has its particulars for sure. I will tell you, you get to, for instance, consumer electronics and semiconductor, it is about speed to market. And they are wringing every bit of profit they can out of the system. They will grind on you. one of the things that's a true reality that every engineer on here probably needs to understand is nobody likes paying for your time. Nobody likes paying for your time. They will pay for a product and usually not argue with you, but if it's your time, they're going to argue. You know, you can do this in a week. You should be able to do it in 4 days, by golly, and you're going to go, down that route. And some industries are just harder on you than others that way. So, in consumer electronics, semiconductor, it's pretty brutal there. You get into the medical space, the biomedical space, for instance, it's not about that. It is about probably more accuracy and lack of failure than anything else. And so you move into the more heavily regulated industry. So I'll say like medical or like aerospace, for instance. Nobody is interested in how many airplanes Boeing can run out their hangars in a given year. They're more worried about what's the quality of the airplanes going out of there. And so those things will come into play. Now, the approach in test engineering fundamentally is the same. What is it that you need to test? What kind of data do you ultimately want? Is it digital data? Is it analog data? Is it visual data? Are these kinds of things? And what do you want to do with that data? So I can overly simplify it that way. But again, ultimately what they care about is making sure that it's reliable or it's robust or it's fast or it's cheap or some combination of those things.
When you said nobody wants to pay for your time, that really resonated with me. I mean, we get that because we sell our time, basically, right, at the end of the day. And so we've certainly experienced some of that. I wonder if you have any pro tips about what has Testeract done or you personally to overcome that and to package your time in a way that it's more of a product or a productized service as opposed to just selling hours.
Yeah. You've got to get yourself away from commoditizing. And so every engineer, again, on here will probably resonate with this as well, but you don't want to be an also-ran. Like you can go to Upworks or wherever and say, hey, what is it? What's the hourly range for a C++ programmer out there? And you're going to see there's a sea of those folks. And if all you care about is C++ programming, there is no differentiation out there. They'll talk about their experience and different things, but to somebody out there looking at that who's actually paying for the time, they probably don't care about that so much. And the more you move yourself or your service towards a commodity, the more you're going to have pressures around what people are willing or not willing to pay for that time. The more you can show the uniqueness of what you're bringing, and again, it's not just experience. That's a part of it, but it's the value of what you're doing in terms of the end deliverable to the customer. So in my case, if we're going to talk about test, there's a bunch of people out there that can help them test their widget. But if I can help them test their widget faster or with more quality or whatever, and I've got a proven track record, that's where I'm going to sell that. And it's a value-based engagement as opposed to a commodity-based engagement.
Yeah, that's great. Clint, this has been wonderful. I think that you've shared a lot of information that most of us engineers just never really think about, right? Because we're not in the sales space, but we probably should at least have a basic knowledge and understanding of, and I think that's what you've given us today. So thank you so much for doing that. You're
welcome. Thank you for having me. This has been fantastic. This is a great series, and you're very kind to allow me to contribute a little bit here. I hope that it is helpful and would love to hear from you or anyone else that may have following on questions.
Well, that's a great segue into the last question, which is how can people get in touch with you?
Absolutely. I am on LinkedIn, Clint Biggs at Testeract. You can find me.
I'm Aaron Montgomery, founder of Pipeline Design
also
and
generally,
Engineering.
You're welcome.
If you like what you heard today, please share the episode to learn how your team can leverage our team's expertise developing advanced manufacturing processes, automated machines,
terrific.
And
Clint,
custom
thank you so
fixtures,
much.
complemented with product design and R&D services. Visit us at teampipeline.us. To join a vibrant community of engineers online, visit thewave.engineer. Thank you for listening.